All right. Welcome to today's meeting, discussion on honest conversations about special education. My name is Rudy Lovell, first Vice President of the Barbados Union of Teachers. I am your moderator. The other moderator for today's presentation is Ms. Cherise Rock, Executive Member of the Barbados Union of Teachers and Deputy Chair of the Professional Development and Research Committee. I now call this meeting to order. I'm going to ask Sister Kelly Arthur, member of the Professional Development and Research Committee, to lead us off in a word of prayer. Sister Arthur.
Good evening, everyone. Let's pray. Father God, we thank you for who you are, dear God. We thank you for all that you have done, all that you are doing, and all that you are about to do. God, I thank you for this opportunity for us to gather as educational professionals as we discuss pertinent matters as it relates to education across the region. God, I ask that you grant each and every one of us here an abundance of wisdom, an abundance of patience. God, I ask that you grant us good physical health and good mental health, dear God, as we seek to help these children, dear Father God, across the region. I ask, dear Father God, that your presence be with all those who are participating this evening, our moderators, our presenters, our participants, the organizing committee who will fulfill various roles this evening, dear God, and the executive of the Barbados Union of Teachers. God, I ask that you have your way this evening, dear Father God, and bless each and every one of us. I ask this in no other name but the name of your Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.
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 Thank you very much, Sister Arthur. I will now invite the President of the Barbados Union of Teachers, Brother Pedro Shepherd, to give brief remarks. Brother Shepherd. While we are waiting for Mr. Shepherd to give us those remarks. You're here, Mr. Shepherd? We're hearing you. Or the president appears to be having technical difficulties. So in the meantime, let me introduce those persons. Yes, sir, you're here? Brother Shepherd? All right, while we're waiting for Mr. Shepherd, let me thank those persons who work hard behind the scenes to make this presentation a reality. Please join me in welcoming Rudy Lovell, Chairman of the Committee, Sister Cherise Rock, Deputy Chair, Brother Julian Pierre, Second Vice President of the Barbados Union of Teachers, Sister Marcia Burke, PRO of the Barbados Union of Teachers, Sister Trudy Harris, Brother Ian Marshall, Stacia Burris, Sister Natalie Rowe, and Sister Kelly Arthur. Thank you very much for the work you've done to make this event a reality. Brother Shepherd, are you with us? We're not hearing you, sir. Still not hear you, Brother Shepherd. Okay, while we're waiting for Mr. Shepherd, let me give a brief introduction into the panelists. On our panel today, there's an excellent mix of special education practitioners, a real Caribbean fellow, a senior education officer who's currently overseeing the implementation of a specialized curriculum for secondary school age children with disabilities, an education officer trained in communication disorders, and two special education practitioners, both trained in educational assessment, one attached to a primary school and the other attached to a secondary school. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Dr. Sharon Anderson-Morgan, Assistant Chief Education Officer with responsibility for the Special Unit, Ministry of Education in Jamaica. Ms. Afiya Smith, Education Officer, Special Needs from the British Virgin Islands. Mrs. Lashaunda Skippings, Special Education Therapist from the Turks and Caicos Islands. And lastly, a lady who I'm proud to call my colleague, Mrs. Allison Murray, Special Education Therapist, Literacy Specialist from right here in Barbados. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming these esteemed ladies. Brother Shepherd, are you with us?
I am here, if you're hearing me.
Yes, sir, we're now hearing you.
Okay, was having some challenges with the internet here.
Go right ahead, sir.
Okay, good evening, colleagues. Let me take this opportunity to welcome all of you to this activity sponsored by the Barbados Union of Teachers, Professional Development and Research Arm, headed by none other than Rudy Lovell. The title of this workshop, Honest Conversations About Special Needs, has caused me to wonder if we were never honest in our conversation about special needs over the years. It has also caused me to reflect on special needs and what it really is. Is it for those only with impairments and disabilities, or for all with a special need? I've taken note of the fact that the workshop is being conducted on the Zoom platform and involves persons from around the Caribbean. I have noted a distinguished panel of presenters from across the region, from as far as Turks and Caicos, Jamaica, British Virgin Islands, and of course, our own Barbadian as well. It appears to be an interesting lineup, and I'm hopeful that the invitation has been circulated to the members of the Caribbean of Teachers so that we all can share our notes and benefit from each other's experience. As was mentioned, we have a panel of very distinguished persons. I wouldn't go through the names now as Comrade Rudy Lovell gave the names just now, but I want to just simply welcome all of you on behalf of the Barbados Union of Teachers, and I trust that this workshop would not be the first and the last, but that we would have a series of follow-ups after this workshop, as we tend to bring our teachers of special needs from the region together as we push the whole concept of special education across the region. So once again, let me welcome all of you to this workshop, and I trust that it is going to be very informative and educational, and that we, at the end of it, shall be better off from having participated. Thank you and have a wonderful workshop.
Thank you very much, Brother Shepherd. In preparing for this discussion, research indicated that there are several learning disabilities, including intellectual disabilities, emotional problems, orthopedic disability, deafness or hearing problems, speech or language disability, autism, blindness or other vision problems, a learning disability in math or reading. Health impairment can include ADD, ADHD, deaf blindness, multiple disabilities. Given this long list, before we begin, can any one of the panelists give us a definition for special education? And what are the areas of special education? Anyone?
All right, I guess I'll take it. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for your welcome.
Good afternoon, teacher.
Generally speaking, special education is that branch of education that caters to students with special education needs, and you listed quite a number of them just now. The Council of Exceptional Students, the Council of Exceptionalities lists about 13 categories. And some of what you gave are included in those categories. So it is education that is outside of what would be provided for your average learner or your typically developing learner, to put it generally.
Thank you very much, Dr. Morgan. I want to extend a special welcome to all those persons from the region. I think we have participants from Jamaica. I think we have a participant from the UK. And I also want to extend special welcome to, I got a call from Dr. John Weatherhead, who is a special needs education practitioner in the US. So welcome to our discussion. I'm now going to invite Sister Marcia Burke, Public Relations Officer of the Barbados Union of Teachers, to welcome Miss Afiya Smith. Sister Burke.
Thank you, Rudy, and good evening, everyone. Mrs. Afiya Smith is the Education Officer with responsibility for special educational needs in the Ministry of Education, British Virgin Islands. Prior to this, she was employed as a speech and language pathologist assistant, and thereafter a special education teacher providing intervention for students with mild moderate disabilities. Her goal is to see the education system be fully inclusive of all types of learners, where the necessary accommodations and modifications are implemented and accepted by all. Mrs. Smith has a goal of one day in the not so distant future, owning a multi-indoor recreation center for persons with disabilities. This establishment will also employ persons with disabilities as well. By the end of the year, it is her hope to connect with businesses and photographers to promote special needs in the area of fashion and arts. Mrs. Smith is the holder of a bachelor degree in communication disorder and science, and a master's degree in education with a concentration in special education from Walden University. In her spare time, she is an active member of the Church of God of Prophecy, where she serves as the young adult leader and dance leader. She lives by the mottos, God is with me, so I will not fail, and hope, having only positive expectations. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you Mrs. Afiya Smith.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Afiya Smith, as mentioned before in my bio, and I'm happy to be here and to give a brief, short presentation and answer any questions that pertain to special education here in the BVI and in the region as best as I can. Just to kind of add a little more detail, my passion is to see all students progress in our systems throughout our territory here in the BVI and as well as beyond, because indeed all students can learn. As mentioned, I do have a couple of special ed qualifications under my belt. My first love is actually the population of the deaf and those that are impaired, hearing impaired. I was very fluent in sign language, but because our population does not have a vast number of students who require that area, I kind of have lost it along the way. But I do hope to regain that skill at some point. So basically, I'm just here to share a bit of what is transpiring here in the BVI in terms of special education and any other information that I see pertinent. First, I'm gonna start with speech and language because I realize I'm the only person on the panel that has some background in this area. I could be wrong. So I went to college and I studied speech and language pathology and as a bachelor degree. But in order to be a practitioner, you have to have your master's. So I came back to the territory and I started practicing. The population here in the BVI required speech and language services at that time was not a large population. We had students who were hearing impaired, we had students with articulation challenges, expressive language, and so forth. So what we have done over the years is sort of a pull-out system where the students will come to the Ministry of Education and receive services that way. While I was doing that, I realized that I was not meeting the needs of the students, in my opinion. I wanted to be more in contact with them. So I transitioned to the school setting, whereas if some of us may be aware, in the United States and other jurisdictions, these professionals are attached to school districts or in a school. And in the BVI, at that time, it was just one speech and language pathologist, and then I assisted her covering the entire territory, which includes 4 main islands, which houses about 13 schools. So it was a challenge for parents to bring them to us and so forth. So at that time, I decided to transition. So most of the services that we provide with speech and language has developed over the years. That was in 2009. And to just give a big background of special ed here in the BVI, it's fairly new, but I must say we have made some significant strides. I'm not sure of my regional counterparts, but I know here in the BVI, in 2000, yes, that's when the first education officer for special education was assigned. And that responsibility again was governing all the schools and all the students who were deemed in any of the 13 categories as requiring special educational services. At that time, they were locked away or isolated or dropping out of school, or the services from the educational system was not catering to their needs and their strengths. So we had a large population at that point that was struggling. But as the years progressed, we found we adjusted and made systematic changes to the way that we provided a service. So first we started out by zoning some of our schools and providing that 1 person or 2 persons to provide that level of support to the schools in that zone. And as we moved on, we kind of gave them the title and more persons became knowledgeable and started studying special ed or different areas, autism, speech and language, any type of area, anything that would cross over into special ed, persons begin studying. So in 2014, we developed a procedural system where we realized that as students progressed, we had no way of documenting who required special ed, what were the disabilities, how we can influence the powers that be, because everything is driven by data. So in 2014, the former education officer presented a proposal for a procedural system. So I'm just gonna briefly go through it. It may seem long, but I'm gonna briefly go through what we do here in the BVI when it comes to special ed. So our procedure is basically a referral system. So our teachers in our school system and our administrators are aware that the students require that they have to refer the students if they're seeing any challenges. Now we know teachers always say they're not trained, they don't have an idea what they're looking for. But at that time, we were just trying to gather information. So we set up benchmark things like, okay, students who repeated multiple times, those who were struggling in math or language, those who are a certain age but are still in primary school or at secondary level and not moving forward. So those were the students that we flagged. Here in the BVI as well, we have one government-based educational psychologist. And that was in initial stage of early special education. Now in 2021, we have 1 government and 4 private psychologists who diagnose our children here in the BVI. And again, like I said, that shows that there has been some level of progression. So now here in 2021, our population is vast. We have students with autism, we have students with Down syndrome. We have students with specific learning disabilities. We have students who, to an average person, don't look the part, but they do have disabilities. We have students with ADHD. We have students with intellectual disability within our school system at present. I would not say we are where we would like to be, but I would say we're not where we were. So with that support and coverage in the BVI, we still have some ways to go in terms of our resources. Now, I know we're here discussing special education and an honest conversation. And I'm going to be very honest. There's still more for us to go, more ways. I think here in the BVI, our mindset is changing. We are realizing that they are a part of our system and we cannot isolate them anymore. We cannot say, well, they don't belong, or we cannot turn a blind eye within our schools and in our school districts and in our governments. Because, and I must say, when I was speaking to Allyson earlier, that we have, at least in 2021 now, my Minister of Education is buying into this conversation. So hopefully in the next year, 2, 3, we should see some more things turning when it comes to special education here in the BVI. And I just want to say to all that, you know, it's not an easy journey. And I always tell my colleagues and those teachers that I encounter, we have to be the advocate that we want for these children. Most of the students don't have that support system at home. Most of the parents that we deal with here in the BVI, they themselves have their own challenges academically, cognitively, intellectually. So when we're having discussions with them and asking them to do certain things to help this child with at home on the weekends, it's a struggle because they don't comprehend or understand or even see the need for it. So we become like their parents, we become like their guardians, and we become that voice within the sphere of our school system and our governmental system to say, hey, we have to put things in place to accommodate these students, to provide the necessary modifications that they need to be successful citizens within our community. I often tell people that when we look around and we look at our prisons and our burial grounds, most times the younger persons, if we went back in history to their school record, they were either not good readers or math was a problem, or, you know, they could not control their anger and their emotions. And in those times, it was not deemed special ed. It was just, you know, they have a behavioral issue, or, you know, they're just not good at math, or they're just not good at reading. And now with all the knowledge and the accessibility to information, we're now understanding these things are not just fly-by-night things. They have a name, they have a description that goes with why students are demonstrating these challenges. But I find that, yes, we're now identifying, but the look of education has to start to reflect that we now come from a level of understanding to a level of implementation. Our classrooms have to look more acceptable to all learners. Our school infrastructures have to look that way. The teaching fraternity has to come with a different mindset to say, okay, they're in my class. I may not know how, but who do I look to? Who do I reach out to? Who do I speak to make sure that the students receive what they need within education? So again, we do have students. My role is very large. It's just one person, myself, but I cover from preschool all the way to 12th grade or grade 6, or yes, in your state. And for me, that's a lot, but I'm looking at ways that we can bridge those gaps. Because when I was working in the school, it's only my school I was affiliated with, and the information was only school-based. Students who came from the preschools into the primary schools, we had no idea who was what, and so we were still trying to revamp. But now I am trying to get us to have this transitional plan that flows from our preschools all the way to exiting our secondary schools, because I always believe, and I live by another motto, that we have to create independent citizens. A lot of them, yes, they have their challenges, but they have their areas of strengths. And if we capitalize on those strengths, we will see productive citizens. And that's where, like she's read in my bio, where I see a lot of them are into the fashion, the arts, and those things are not harnessed. We're just paper and pencil and chalkboard and Promethean boards or anything that we think education should be. But we don't find ways to use their strengths as a way of developing their learning. So within all the Caribbean islands, I'm sure some of the things that I'm mentioning may or may not apply, but that's just my little short presentation. And then if you have questions, I'll be happy to answer as we go along. So thank you for the time.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Afiya Smith. I'm now going to, let me say that we are going to have a question and answer session at the end. So please remember those questions that you want to pose. I'm now going to invite Brother Ian Marshall, member of the Professional Development and Research Committee, to introduce our second presenter, Dr. Sharon Anderson-Morgan. Mr. Ian Marshall. You're muted, Ian. You have to unmute, please.
Sorry. Good afternoon, everyone. Dr. Sharon Anderson-Morgan has been a special educator for over 25 years. She taught at the Listomere Gilby School for the Deaf, Maypen Unit, where she had responsibility for the lower school and also for in-service training. She has also worked as a resource room teacher at the Exeter High School in Ontario, Canada. As a teacher educator at the Sam Sharp Teachers College, she served as head of the special education department and a principal lecturer with specific responsibility for the community outreach program of the college. Dr. Morgan is currently the Assistant Chief Education Officer with responsibility for the Special Education Unit in the Ministry of Education, Youth and Information, Jamaica. She holds a diploma in special education from Mico Teachers College, a bachelor's in special education with concentration in clinical assessment from the University of the West Indies, a Master of Science in Literacy and Language Arts from Central Connecticut State University, a Doctor of Education degree from Nova Southeastern University. Her doctoral research focused on the preparation of pre-service teachers for including students with special needs in general education classrooms. Dr. Morgan has also done several short courses, including a certificate in language enrichment. I'm sorry. A model for teaching reading to students with learning disabilities at the Nijos Education Institute in Texas, USA. She has presented at several international conferences, including the Caribbean Symposium on Inclusive Education, the International Conference on Education for Teaching, 60th World Assembly, and the Division of International Special Education and Services. Sharon is a wife and mother of 2 children and enjoys planning events, conducting research, reading, and writing poetry. Welcome, Dr. Anderson.
Okay, thank you so much. That's all right. Good afternoon, everyone. I first want to congratulate the Barbados Union of Teachers on this conversation. And yes, honest conversations are needed. I believe we are more alike than different, and we really should take the time to listen to each other, what we are doing in our various countries. So I'm going to go through my brief presentation. We were given a few guiding questions, and I'm going to try as close as possible to stick to those, to look at what are some policy guidelines for special education, some best practices, and some challenges. So I'm going to start out by talking about our policies. Now, Jamaica is, and I'm already having some technical challenges. I'm having bandwidth issues, so my presentation is not moving, but I'll go ahead. So Jamaica is a signatory to the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. We were one of the first countries to sign and ratify that convention, and we did that in 2007. So that guides a lot of what we do. So the convention speaks to, and one aspect of the convention is education. So it speaks to the provisions that should be put in place for students with special needs. And the country has to give periodic reports on how we are meeting these provisions under the convention. We also have, I'm gonna stop sharing for a while and keep speaking while I try to get this working properly. We also have the National Disability Act, which was passed in 2014, and the Act reflects the provisions of the convention. So education is one aspect under this Act, and it looks at other areas like transportation and health and so on. But under the Act, it specifies that children with disabilities or persons with disabilities generally cannot be denied access to the education system by virtue of a disability. All right. So we also have a draft special education policy. So it's still in draft because it has not yet been passed in our parliament. However, it also speaks to the accommodations and modifications for children with disabilities within our schools, and further speaks to the roles of our various stakeholders in providing these accommodations and modifications. All right, so that's what it looks like for us in terms of policy. Now, in terms of what I consider some of our best practices. Now, special education for us started out, it started with NGOs, really, non-government organizations and parents of children with special needs. And that was, our first school probably started in about 1938. However, it was not until the 1970s with the passing of free education that the government took over some of these private schools, and so they came under government funding. Though we have, since the 1980s, a special education unit within the Ministry of Education. And the special education unit gives oversight to all special education provisions. You know, if nobody owns it, then it's not going to happen, right? So we have that unit. Now we also have units and intervention programs attached to some primary schools. So we have students with special needs who attend regular primary schools, but they are in programs where they are in intervention programs, what we call two-year intervention programs, and then they are reintegrated into the mainstream once they are ready for that kind of integration. So the idea is that we will get them in the mainstream, in the intervention program by about grade 2, and by the time they get to grade 4, they will be reintegrated. And I'm still having problems with it, with the PowerPoint, but I'll just go ahead. All right, so that's one. I'd consider that a best practice for us because it means that the children get to attend school with their peers, even though they need particular intervention services. There's also the alternative pathways to secondary education, which was launched in 2016, where students enter the secondary level on one of 3 pathways. So we have a pathways 1, 2, 3, and pathway 1 is your more normative pathway where your students who do not require any particular intervention would enter. Pathway 2 is a 2-year transition for students who may require some intervention, but not very intensive. And then there's pathway 3 for your students who require more intensive support. And these students are supported by a student support pathway coach who is a trained special educator. We have teacher training colleges. So now we have 3 teacher training colleges that offer a bachelor's degree in special education. And in addition to that, all teachers, all pre-service teachers do at least one special education course, and that's a requirement for accreditation. There's also quite a bit of capacity building that goes on for teachers within the mainstream school and also for special education teachers. In addition to the units and those intervention programs in the mainstream, we do have some specialized schools. So we have specialized special education schools. We have 1 school for the blind. We have several schools for the deaf. We have 5 schools for students with moderate to severe intellectual disabilities. And in recent years, we have a growing number of students with special needs included in and supported in the mainstream. So we have heard my colleague who presented from the BVI speaking about autism and all of that. So we have students with autism who are in the regular education setting and they receive support within that setting. We have students with physical challenges, mild intellectual challenges, learning disabilities. Those students will be supported in the general education classroom. We have a specialized curriculum which was launched in 2017 for students with moderate to severe intellectual disabilities. So those 5 schools that I spoke about for students with intellectual disabilities, they would use this specialized curriculum. This curriculum would cater to the needs that our national standards curriculum would not address. So for example, the area of life skills, which is an area of deficit for students with intellectual disabilities, would be thoroughly addressed in that curriculum. And that curriculum would use a functional approach so that students are constantly being developed in those functional areas. Additional best practices, we have regional special needs coordinators. So we have the special education unit, which is more a policy unit. And then we have our regional special needs coordinator. So our educational system is divided into 7 regions and each region has a coordinator. This coordinator has specific responsibility for providing support for students with special needs within the mainstream, so students in general education classroom, while the education officers in the special education unit, central ministry, provide support to the segregated schools, the special schools. There are also regional student support teams. These teams comprise of clinical psychologists and educational psychologists and an educational diagnostician. And we have 3 diagnostic assessment centers. We're trying to put these strategically located across the island so that we have students being diagnosed and assessed early, because that's one of our challenges, as I'll get to. There's a government-funded early stimulation program. It is not in the Ministry of Education, but it is also supported by this ministry. Another strength, another best practice is our public-private partnerships. We have lots of partnerships with private schools. So the government signs memorandum of understanding with private schools. So let me give you one example. We have a school for students with severe physical and intellectual challenges. Now, these students would not be adequately served within the general education system. So the Ministry of Education partners with this private school and places students there because that's the best place for them. We also have partnerships with business entities where we receive funding support for infrastructure and programs within special education. One of the programs that I feel like we're very proud of because it has made a significant impact in accommodating learners with special needs in the general education system is our Shadow Caregiver program. So for some students who are in the general education system, because of their individual needs, they need some one-on-one support. So the Ministry of Education, the government engages shadows or caregivers to go to school with these students and to support them. So if it's a physical disability, they may need someone to assist with writing or hygiene, feeding, whatever it is. If they have autism, ADHD, and they need someone to keep them on task, they can apply for this kind of support and they receive this one-on-one support. Exam accommodations is also another best practice over the last couple of years, where students with special needs sit in our national examinations can apply for accommodations. And so they can receive, so they sit the same exam as everyone else. their grade 6, grade 4, grade 5, grade 6 exams, and they receive accommodations. They may get extra time, they may have a reader writer, or whatever they may need. My internet is a little bit unstable, so hopefully you're still hearing me. We have a Braille and large print department within the Ministry of Education, and this department provides material in Braille or large print for students who are blind or visually impaired. Generally, inclusive early childhood education is inclusive, but we have two particular schools that what I call inclusive by design. So we have these schools that have a designated ratio of students with and without disabilities. So for example, you have one school that has, for every 3 students without disabilities, they enroll 2 students with disabilities. So these schools are designed like that. So we have 2 of those schools, and this is something that we consider best practice and something that we would want to replicate so that students begin that inclusive journey from the early childhood level. All right, so those are some of the best practices that I highlight since we have limited time for this presentation, and I'll just go into some of the challenges. So I really wish I could say, oh, we have no challenges, but that really isn't so. And that wouldn't be an honest report of what is happening. So even though we have 3 teacher training colleges training special educators, we still do not have an adequate number of special educators. So we have difficulty recruiting persons and also retaining persons who are trained. So persons go off to the US and, to other countries to serve, or they do not choose to serve in special education, or you just have a difficulty getting people to want to go to college to do special education. So we have that deficit. We also have the challenge of no nationally established standards for special education programs. So you will have persons starting various programs, but there are no established standards to hold them accountable to say, if you have a special education program, it must have these are the standards that you have to have in order to be considered, a registration or that sort of thing. There's also the challenge, and this seems like, I have a feeling this is going to be common throughout the region, limited publicly funded therapy services. So we have very few speech and language therapists, ABA therapists, etc. And most of the ones we have, so we have probably about 7 OT, about 6 speech therapists, and most of them are privately operating. And so we have that deficit where within the public education system, that service is limited. Of course, there is still the challenge of discrimination and stigma, insensitivity that we continue to battle, even though special education has been around for a while and persons with disabilities. And I heard my colleague talk about the times when they were locked away. Yes, we have gone through that as well. And sometimes still go through some of that because we find children coming to us at 8 and 9 years old who have never been to school. And so we continue to fight with lack of information, awareness, and discrimination, stigma, insensitivity. Another challenge, inadequately trained school leaders. We find that when our school leaders are on board, then the whole process from referral to identification to providing services is seamless. It's much smoother when our school leaders are on board. So we find that our school leaders are not adequately trained to be inclusive instructional leaders. Access to schools and services, particularly in rural areas, some children have to travel great distances to get to a facility that can cater to their needs. Another challenge, all right, so I think I've finished most of the major challenges that I wanted to talk about, and I'll just quickly highlight 3 new initiatives. Or the Vice President spoke earlier, he was listing various areas of special needs. And one of the areas that is often neglected is the area of gifted education. So we talk about children with disabilities who are probably at the lower end of the continuum. But for our students who are high achievers, who are gifted. Sometimes we do not recognize them as being in need of special education services. So we have recently developed a program that's called the Alternative Program for Exceptional Learners. And this program is aimed at gifted students. We haven't launched it yet, but we have been doing a lot of the groundwork. We've done training, we've trained 30 master trainers, we've developed a manual and a number of other activities towards this. We've also recently developed a school to work transition program, and my colleague, Mrs. Smith, spoke about transition earlier because it's a critical area. Probably about over 90% in our country, I know that over 90% of persons with disabilities, adults with disabilities, are unemployed or underemployed. And so school to work transition is critical. It's critical that we prepare our students for life beyond school, ensuring that they have the skills, not just the vocational skills, but also those soft skills that they need to transition into the world of work, that they're certified and competent, and they know how to operate within a workspace. So our school to work transition program is designed to do that. And this is one of the new initiatives that we will be launching. Now, I spoke earlier about the inadequate training of school leaders. And this is also an area that we have sought to address in recent times. So last year, yes, just before COVID, we had a training, we developed a training. So we have a National College of Educational Leadership, and we developed a training program for principals called Inclusive School Leadership Training Program. And 30 principals were trained in this program where we immersed them in special education. We taught them about the nature and needs of students with exceptionalities. We taught them about the laws and the policies that govern these provisions. And we went into talking to them about inclusive school reform. How is it that I reform my school to make it inclusive? We believe that this will be very impactful in the long term, and we hope to continue this so that all our school leaders will be trained and on board. So I'm gonna just stop at that for now. I know we'll have an opportunity to take questions. I don't want to take up too much time because I know we have two other presenters after me. So thank you very much, and I look forward to the questions later on.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sharon Anderson-Morgan. Before I go to the next presenter, I'm going to ask those participants who are with us to indicate in the chat which territory you are representing so we can have an idea of who is among us. I am now going to invite Sister Trudy Harris, member of the Professional Development and Research Committee, to introduce our third presenter, Mrs. Lashaunda Skippings.
Thank you, Rudy. Good evening, everyone. Mrs. Lashaunda Skippings is a God-fearing wife and mother of two and a proud Turks and Caicos Islander. She holds a diploma in special education and a bachelor's degree in educational assessment and instructional planning from the Mico University, Jamaica. Devoting 8 years to teaching in the area of special education in the Turks and Caicos Islands Government School, Mrs. Skippings has demonstrated a passion and dedication to reaching students with special needs. She began teaching a group of remedial learners in her initial years of instruction. Through much advocacy, determination, and innovation, she worked with a group of representatives from the Education Department on the sensitization efforts and delivery of the recently developed special needs education policy. After an education officer was employed, she worked along with him and a team in rolling out this same policy. She spearheaded the introduction of individualized learning plans to be used in place of IEPs, since the ministry had no professionals available to carry out psychological assessments. Mrs. Skippings sourced and set up materials for the first resource room, used as a model now for other government primary schools. She and other special education teachers were then moved from their classrooms to these resource rooms to meet the needs of more students and to assist in carrying out academic assessments and pull-out reading programs. She continues her 9th year of service to the government of the Turks and Caicos Islands as a resource room special education teacher at the newly built Thelma Lightbourne Primary School. Adding to her passion in training the whole child, Mrs. Skippings co-hosts a weekly kids club on Zoom under Firm Foundation Ministries International, catering to children ages 5 to 11, where they are taught and groomed in the fear of God. She strives to live according to Colossians 3:23. Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart, as working for the Lord, not for human masters. Mrs. Lashaunda Skippings.
Thank you, Sister Harris. And a pleasant evening to everyone from the Turks and Caicos Islands. So I'll get right into it as to spare time. The Turks and Caicos Islands is somewhat in the early stages of planning towards meeting the needs of students with special education as it relates to the government schools. In previous years, we had a special education policy that was outdated and not being implemented. However, I am pleased to share today that the special education policy in the Turks and Caicos Islands was revised in 2016 and launched in 2018 with the No Child Left Behind policy initiative under the leadership of the then Special Education Officer, Mr. Jasmine Walkin. It was written and enforced, assuring that all government schools were inclusive. Before I move on, I would also like to recognize the attendance of one of our education officers here in the Turks and Caicos Islands, Dr. Kieran Toussaint. Okay, moving on. The updated policy gave room to the establishment of an SBA team. This is a school-based assessment team, which is a team of school personnel that formally operate as a problem-solving unit. It was created to assist classroom teachers with the development and implementation of instructional and management strategies and coordinate support and resources for students with special needs within the schools. The policy also gave room to the establishment of the Special Education Assessment and Intervention Team. The team comprises of a clinical psychologist, an educational psychologist, special education officer, and special education teachers who are assigned at resource rooms as previously mentioned in all of the government primary schools. The teachers are in all of the government primary schools, but just to know that we just have one clinical psychologist, one educational psychologist, and currently we do not have a special education officer. Though we are without a special education officer, we are currently continuing with these strides. And we also, in addition to our special education student population, we have learners that are ESL learners. We have ESL learners added to that population that make up a large number of those that are catered to within our government primary schools. Academic assessment is now being carried out on a wider scale in the areas of mathematics and reading through an online program used in the primary government schools called iReady. The program not only virtually assesses the performance of students in reading and math, but offers learning paths that cater to their individual needs following their assessment. Teachers have access to the program and are able to assign tasks to their students that follow the same focus in reading and math, but are coherent with the level of performance of each student. I find the program very helpful as it helps in outlining the academic needs of each student without them having to visit the resource room individually for face-to-face assessment. All government primary schools are now in the process of evaluating the results and using them to flag students and to group them for further instruction. The Turks and Caicos Islands is also in the process of introducing an early intervention strategy to be used in the clinics and in the schools to track and to document developmental and behavioral deficits of children from birth to 6 years old. We have successfully completed a pilot run of this and are now preparing to train selected teachers and nurses to carry out these assessments in conjunction with the already established routine visits for children at clinics and the routine assessments of students upon entry to nursery and kindergarten and transitioning onward. We have moved a step forward in using the resources that we have available to collect the required data, but we are now challenged with meeting the needs of secondary and tertiary level students, as well as having the needed paraprofessionals that are required to meet the needs of the primary level students that have been flagged and labeled at risk. However, we are thankful for the growth we have experienced thus far, and we trust that God will continue to open doors for us, for our special needs students. Also, they're in the Turks and Caicos Islands on the island of Providenciales, under the Ministry of Health. We are the home to the SNAP Center, which is a Special Needs Association of Providenciales. The mission of the SNAP Center is to ensure that every person with special needs grow and develop to their full potential. Their vision is to improve the quality of life and independence of students living with special education through the access to care and wellness centers, assessment opportunities, and therapeutic services. The SNAP Center provides intellectual and life skill opportunities for children and young persons with disabilities ages 4 to 20. I would like to recognize also the presence of Miss Noreen McCoy. She was a past program officer of the SNAP Center and was very instrumental in its
You're muted, Miss Collins.
Thank you. In closing, I believe that the Caribbean Association for Special Education and hosting forums such as this that advocates for consistent and effective policies for special education will open the eyes of country leaders, reminding them that special education students have a purpose in the land and have a right to be nurtured and reared, having their social, academic, physical, and health needs catered to, just as other students. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Lashaunda Skippings. So far, we would have identified persons from Jamaica, Barbados, British Virgin Islands, Cayman Islands, United States of America, Turks and Caicos, and Canada. Welcome, colleagues, welcome. I want to give special welcome also to Dr. Janice Gibbs, Mrs. Kay Sargent, Ms. Janelle Little, Ms. Linda Joy, and all those other officials from the Ministry of Education in Barbados who are with us today. Our fourth presenter, who can be considered the brainchild behind this whole presentation today, Mrs. Allison Murray. I'm now going to welcome the second Vice President of the Barbados Union of Teachers, Mr. Brother Julian Pierre, to welcome Mrs. Murray to give her presentation.
We're not hearing you.
We're not hearing you.
Oh, my apologies. No, I handed over to Brother Julian Pierre, who is going to introduce our fourth presenter, Mrs. Allison Murray. Brother Pierre.
Just checking to see if you can hear me.
Yes, we can. We can.
Okay, good. Allison Murray, she is a special education diagnostician and literacy specialist. Her social enterprise, Pennegan Academy of Learning, PAL, aims to use innovation, research, and relationships to arrest plummeting literacy rates in communities of learners who have been ill-served by social systems in the Caribbean. PAL's focus on the individualization of its products continues to set it apart as the Caribbean's premier literacy and special education consultancy. Through her commitment to lifelong learning, Allison continues to position PAL to be ready to answer the question, what can you do to help my child? For close to 2 decades, Allison has been tasked with conceptualizing and operationalizing literacy innovations that meet the needs of clients around the Caribbean. She is responsible for the implementation of the non-categorical resource room programs in 3 secondary schools in Barbados, which serve students who score below 20% in the common entrance examination, what we call now the Barbados Secondary Schools Entrance Examination. She has also introduced the Parent University Innovation and the PAL Help program. PAL Help oversees the mobilization and training of community volunteers to provide examination accommodations to children whose exceptionalities prevent them from having fair access to examination content. Allison is also involved with the training of practitioners at institutions such as Ada Costa Edwards Primary, Abundant Life Assembly, St. Philip Primary, Dunamis Outreach Ministries, Charles F. Broome Memorial Primary Special Unit, Erdison Teachers Training College, and the University of the West Indies Cave Hill campus. Her publications include Teacher Efficacy and Perspectives on Disabled Students' Future Trajectories, using education research to facilitate quality education outcomes in special education in Barbados. A conference paper presented at the American Education Research Association Conference. To know is not enough, Vancouver, Canada. First school, then what? Transition planning for deaf students in Barbados. And quality of teaching and learning in the special education setting in Barbados, UNICEF. We present to you Mrs. Allyson Murray.
Good evening to everyone. I am extremely excited to be here. And thank you so much for the kind introductions. I'm particularly excited because we have so many individuals from around the region here. And I'm also seeing some of our lecturers here from the Michael. 3 of us on the panel, we attended Michael College in Jamaica. So special recognition to Dr. Giles. I see Dr. Mungal is in as well as Dr. Robinson. Thank you so much for popping in. So I am Allison Murray, and my role and responsibility really as at the school that I'm presently placed is to provide, I call it fair access to quality education. I am someone who's very passionate about special education as well as literacy. We would have done quite a bit of studies in both areas. And so it really is a great overlap, a great synergy to have that type of background to be able to help our students. I am serving in what we call a non-categorical resource room program. We use the word non-categorical because there are many students who sit in our classes who've not been diagnosed in any way. We know as teachers that they have challenges with reading, with writing, with spelling, and we're not necessarily sure why. And so the aim really is to provide for them an opportunity to develop and to grow as best they can within the general education setting. So what generally happens for my students is when their classmates are scheduled to attend English class, they are pulled from that session and they sit with me in the resource room. And using results from educational assessments, I would have obviously created instructional plans and be able to provide them with something that can target both strengths and weaknesses. And it was really exciting to hear my other colleagues talking about the referral system. The referral system is so important. It is not a system, I'd say, that is fully understood in Barbados in the secondary school, and that's the only area of education I can really comment on. I've never taught in the primary. I've only ever been in the secondary school. But having referrals, having an opportunity to track student performance from the time they enter school, as they maneuver through, and even as they prepare for the CSET or the other examinations, is really, really important. Because once you have that information, they're allowed to have access to many of the accommodations that perhaps you know about: the reader, the writer, the extra time, breaks if they need them, enlarged print if they need them, but just whatever needs to be put in place for them to have that fair access to examination content. So that's what I do. I love my job. I love working with our students. In terms of policy and law, of course, Barbados has the Education Act, which speaks to the provision of services for students who may have disabilities, but we were promised in 2019 to have a special education policy rolled out or put in place for us that will help guide how we treat to the students that we are meeting up with. And I think it's really, really important. And this is why. If I move to a school and then on to another school and then on to another school, and there's no policy really in place, there's no way for anybody to know what it is that I'm doing or what I'm supposed to be doing. And it often comes over as if it is my thing that I'm doing, and it really isn't. My thing is heavily guided by what I would have been taught in my training experience in Jamaica. It was a wonderful experience to see and to go through teacher training in practice in schools, being assigned to different facilities so that you can develop the competencies that will be needed. And so, you know, coming back to Barbados, I was, you know, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and excited and ready to get rolling. But because there really is no policy for the administration of special education at the secondary level, there are quite a few roadblocks that are faced. Of course, you need to have time to do assessments. You need to have referral forms filled out, and you need to have colleagues understanding exactly what special education is and what they need to put in place to accommodate the students that we are teaching. And so the job becomes a bit challenging because of this lack of this written special education policy. You know, you know for certain what a school stands for when it comes to substitution or when it comes to sports day. You see your notices and you understand what's expected of you. But as it relates to special education, it's painful at times not being able to provide for students what you know they can be given, because there really is nothing written for anybody to say, well, hey, can you do this? Or hey, you haven't done that. And so this definitely is an area that I want us to talk a little bit more about later as we are terming this session Honest Conversations. And I'm willing to get really honest about this. There are really some great initiatives though that are in some of our schools. I would have heard some of my colleagues mentioning the accommodation. So I do know that many of our secondary schools, we have the readers who go in for our students who do CSE or City and Guilds, and they are able to do exceptionally well. I think on this call, I have one of my students, Caitlin Ward. She's just successfully completed a bachelor's at the UB with first class honors, and Caitlin would have been one of the students who came into Spring Memorial with a referral from a parent. Her parent came in, her parent said, my child has dyslexia. I heard that your school has a program in place and you need to have her enrolled. And with that parental involvement and Caitlin's wonderful spirit and the interventions that we would have been using, Caitlin is an absolute success. She is a story that should be plastered on the front page of our newspapers, so people can see what is possible when a really well-structured program for our students is put into place. All right, so I'll end there, but just to say grateful again for the opportunity and really looking forward to some more honest discussion a bit later on. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mrs. Allison Murray. I'm just going to outline the rules for the question and answer section. For those who would wish to ask a question, simply indicate so by raising your hands, and the moderator, who is going to be Sister Cherise Rock, will identify you, and we will try to do it in the order in which you would have raised your hand. Before I hand over to Mrs. Cherise Rock, because I am the host, I don't think I may be able to raise my hand. So permit me to ask two questions to the panelists, please. Anyone can answer the questions as I pose them. The first question, there are two buzzwords in special education. These are integration and inclusion. Are these terms the same? Can you clear up the similarities and differences for us? Also, tell us what inclusion looks like in your country. Anyone?
I was trying not to go first again since I did that the last time, but I guess I'll go. Inclusion and integration are different. Integration may be considered a form of inclusion, but it's not full inclusion. So when you talk about full inclusion, you're talking about having students with disabilities in mainstream school, no pull-out. All the services are brought to them within their regular classroom. All the supports are in place within the regular classroom. Now, students who are integrated may attend the same school, but they may be in pull-out classes, intervention units, etc. But they attend the regular school. And in some cases, they may not have any activities with their peers. They are in the school, but they are separate in a sense. So integration may be considered partial inclusion, but full inclusion means that all services are brought into the classroom. And your second part was, what does it look like in my country? Do I just leave that for someone else?
You could, it's your
All right, so in our country, we're not a fully inclusive system, as my presentation alluded to. Our philosophy is, as far as is possible, right? Students with special needs are included, are in the regular education system, but we are mindful that for some students, they may be better served in a segregated setting based on their needs. And so for us, inclusion looks like there is partial inclusion, and I spoke about the units, the intervention programs, where students attend a regular school, but they receive services outside of that classroom. But we do have thousands of students with identified special needs who are in the regular classroom and are provided with support as needed. In terms of, I spoke about the shadow caregivers, they're provided with the accommodations and so on within their regular classrooms and supported by the regional special needs coordinators.
Okay, this is a follow-up question then. The unofficial motto of the community of persons with disabilities is nothing about us without us. As you reflect on the students you serve, what type of opportunities are provided for them to weigh in on what works best for them? Are we at a place yet where an individual with a disability can say to a school, the current subjects you are offering me are not serving me in any way? Anyone? I see Afiya has her hand up.
I just basically had that conversation last week with a colleague in terms of, it's my daughter there, in terms of, are we at a place where students are able to voice their own needs? And I would say we are not there in the BVA. And it's not that we are not there because the student cannot voice their opinion. I would say we have not presented that opportunity, especially when it comes to our secondary and upper primary students, even those with mild, moderate, even some severe students. We don't speak to them and inquire what their needs are, what they would like, and if it's working, and because we're going ahead, putting the programs in place, putting the structures in place, but we're not stopping to say, is it work? Are the students pleased with what they're receiving? And I think that's a part of special ed that we have not embraced 100% here in the BVI. And that's because we're still moving in the cycle of this inclusive learning environment for the students.
Thank you. Permit me to ask Lashaunda a question, please. Mrs. Skippings. Teachers are vital role models. Some believe that the diversity desired in the student population should be reflected in the teacher population. How much of your special education teacher complement is made up of teachers with exceptionalities?
I would say we are diverse as it relates to our cultural backgrounds, because we have teachers in the Turks and Caicos Islands. Maybe I would say 30% are from the Turks and Caicos Islands. We have quite a number of Jamaican teachers. We have teachers from Barbados. We have teachers from Guyana. So I would say what makes the teachers diverse would be their cultural backgrounds. I don't think there are any exceptional special needs that we have. We don't have any teachers with exceptional special needs. Maybe gifted, maybe some gifted. But there aren't any with special needs. You would hear a few glory stories of teachers that have maybe had learning disabilities in their early years of learning. I myself would say I had, difficulty in the area of mathematics, difficulty in the area of spelling, but to say labels, teachers that have overcome labels in special education, no, we do not have any of those here in the Turks and Caicos Islands. The cultural difference is what we have mainly.
Thank you very much. And Sister Allison Murray, I cannot leave you out of the question and answer section. To you, Ms. Murray, you have just written a book about special education as it is practiced in your territory, which is Barbados. What would the headline say and why?
Well, thank you, Rudy, for this wonderful question. The headline will probably say, prepare for the silence. Prepare for the silence. There is a lot of silence around special education from my experience. There's a lot of silence when I ask questions. There is too much silence from parents who know that their children are struggling, who know that their children need assistance, but somehow are afraid to ask teachers or are somehow afraid to go to the school and ask the principal, what have you been doing to help my child? He has been here from September and he still can't write his name. What do you have in place in this free, fair education system for my child? There's a lot of silence among colleagues. We have our corridor conversations, but for us to sit down as a collaborative team to plan units, to plan integrated instruction for our students, it is not happening. So for sure, it will be related to silence.
Thank you very much, Sister Murray. I now hand over to Sister Cherise Rock, who will take you through the remainder of the question and answer session. Sister
Thank you.
Rock.
Thank you very much, Brother Rudy. I invite you to ask your questions. Just raise your hand and I will call on you. Make your questions as brief as possible, and I'm sure the panelists will be as concise as possible. Okay, I am seeing a hand raised by a Rayano. Go ahead. R-Y-A-N-O.
Yes, hello. My question is, how, as a member of the community, how can I lend assistance to what you all are doing?
You said as a member of the community, you're not a teacher, you're not an educator?
No.
Okay, and anybody you want to answer this question?
Yeah, I think that community linkages are something that we can continue to explore. And when a member of the community is saying, how can I help? We think a lot about, there's a mill, and we know that our mills need other mills to come in and to act as mentors for them. But I'm hopeful, Sir Rayano, I'm hopeful that you are aware, though, that there are some initiatives at some schools. For example, there's one that I would have assisted with at St. George Secondary, where we brought members of the community in. We did some training, and these members of the community were able to provide some accommodations for students at the end of the academic year. So we told them about being able to read for students and write or act as scribes for them. So these are the types of opportunities, sir, that you can definitely assist with. Turning up for our young men is really important. So if you are, I don't know if you're a Ronaldinho, or if you're a footballer or something, but if you have some type of club, some type of consistent way that you can show up for our children, that would be absolutely wonderful.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Murray. Just today in the press, there was a story of a young man who goes to the Learning Center who is representing Barbados in wrestling. So I think that aligns to what you were speaking about, Miss Dr. Murray. Miss Dr. Murray, right?
Soon, just Allison, no, just soon though, soon.
Okay, I'll speak it into being. Okay, next we have a question from Trudy Harris. Go ahead, Trudy.
Hi, good evening. I just wanted someone on the panel to speak a little about assessment. I know in the Caribbean, we are very exam driven. I would say exam obsessed. So if we can get probably one comment from one of our regional colleagues about how students with special needs get accommodations around examination time. And then of course, from Ms. Murray, in terms of the Barbadian context. Yes, you would have worked specifically with St. George Secondary, but if you could speak to accommodations that are hopefully standard and available to all students with special needs here. Thank you.
I could speak a little bit about that from the BVI standpoint. Basically what we do here, again, everything for us is on a referral basis, because what we found happening prior to that is that every teacher would say, Johnny needs to be read for, or Mary needs extra time, things like that. So we had to put a structure in place to ensure that the students that actually need the accommodations were receiving that accommodations. Now we know there may be one or two that may slip through the cracks, but so for all our examinations, students with special ed, we have two levels. We have those who are what we call on our intervention plan, which are in school structure of intervention. They receive some level of accommodation, whether it's reading, writing, scribe, calculator, whatever they need to assist the student in successfully completing the assessment. Now, when it comes to regional exams like CXC, we do Key Stage and CSEC and so forth, we have to send forth documentation that we have already been doing this for the student here on local and island so that they can receive it at that level. We also have some students who are on IEPs, so they have their own modified curriculum. So they have modifications where they are exempt from certain national exams because the content they would have not covered based on that documentation. So our referral process or procedural document guides who receives the accommodation, and it covers all assessments, both local and international and regional.
Thank you, Mrs. Smith. Allison?
I think Dr. Anderson wanted to begin.
Yeah.
Yes, please.
All right, thanks.
Sorry.
So if I could just weigh in on that a little bit, our process is that students with special needs have to present to us when they register for the exams a psychoeducational assessment report, which is then reviewed, and then it is determined what accommodations can be granted for them. So we will not operate without that, because then the problem that Ms. Smith spoke about will abound, where everyone will think that they are deserving. So we have these standards. We have a document which outlines the process, and the system sends out a bulletin that outlines that process, and then they apply, and you have that review and that feedback. Then we have training for the persons who will facilitate the accommodation. So we train our readers, our writers, and so on, so that the same standard is being maintained in all examination centers.
Yeah, and
Thank you, Dr. Morgan.
Go ahead. In Barbados, of course, there's a standard. The innovation I spoke of earlier would have been an in-school attempt at catering to the needs of students who would have been, they would have been assessed in the context of the school. So we do use the micro-diagnostic reading test. And I get excited every time I say Michael, I'm sorry. So we do those assessments, and then obviously we're able to determine, student strengths and weaknesses, and we would know if the child would need to have the assessment. Assessments are quite pricey in the Barbadian context, and many of our students are from those socioeconomic homes. And so within a school, a principal can decide, well, we're going to use our Michael diagnostic rating test scores or the DRA, whichever assessment, we're going to use that so that the child gets the accommodations, and we start keeping our notes, start keeping our files, so that as the child gets a bit closer to CXC, it gives the parents a chance to, save that $2,200 and get the assessment done so that the child can get those accommodations for CXC.
Thank you very much, Allison. I realize in the primary school context, spoke to the secondary school context, there are some parents who wait till just before common entrance to realize that their child needs a bigger print or their child needs extra time. So I know of these accommodations that are made at the Barbados secondary school entrance exam level. Next, I see a hand raised by Ian Marshall. Go ahead, Ian.
Hi. Mine is more of a short comment rather than a question. Now, when I did Allison training, now my special needs education was in the form of a half-day seminar. That was in 2014, 2015. I'm not sure how much it has changed, but it was more policy than learning about special needs education. We were taught that the Salamanca Convention was supposed to include or integrate those children into the system. But I know as far as the Education Act is concerned, as well, I can speak in subject to correction, but last time I checked, it was not ratified. So we have a situation where we're still speaking of special schools when we are supposed to be really integrating or including, mixed up my terms here, but you can correct me. And those children with special needs into the system. I know at the school at which I teach, we had a few cases where children were brought in with those kind of needs. And this was before I went to Erdison, and I kept asking questions, why are these children not in special school? Then I was told about when I reached Erdison, it's only when I began to really fully understand it about the Salamanca Convention and the need for these students to be in the school with their peers. We also have a situation where teachers who are in special needs have moved into administration. Because, I mean, we have to be fair and we have to be frank that those teachers are looking for more pay and betterment and such. Like, so a lot of them have been promoted to senior teachers and have been promoted to principals. And therefore, there is a void of those teachers now within the system, and that is problematic. The other issue we have is these resources which are available to teachers. Now, as was mentioned just now, we have at the primary school level, lots of children who are in need of special needs education. And I think that more teachers should be integrated in the system. But my question is it a matter of pay? Because quite frankly, there are some classes which require more than one teacher because of the size and because of the levels of the cognitive ability of those children. So, I'm asking really what resources are there available for teachers in Barbados for those kind of situations and students.
Well, you're asking Barbados, so that question coming back to me there, man. Put me on the spot. I can only give from my experience. I've never taught in the primary school. I've said this before. And we're having honest conversations, and the honest conversation, the honest thing that I have to say is that there are not really many opportunities for support at this level. When I introduced the resourcing program at Spring Memorial in 2008, fresh out to Michael in Jamaica, I would have been coming back with many of my own resources, and which I don't have an issue with using. I still use them now. But many of the things that I use are things that I personally buy. For me, I think not that the school should have a bank account that I can draw from, but I think that, if we know that our students have particular needs, that there should be some type of fund available, especially in the online environment. When, COVID would have come and everybody is home, my first thought was, oh my goodness, what are my children going to do? How are you going to provide instruction for these children? And it didn't quite work out as I would have wanted it to work out. But I heard you mention earlier about teachers wanting more pay and everything, but there's still many of us in special ed who are loving being on the ground. Kudos to the individuals who are able to get to the level of the ministry, wonderful aspiration and everything, but we're still on the ground, still here with the children who need the extra support. But I feel as if there should be much more. I know at the primary schools, or I've seen that there would have been some donations for primary schools, but at the secondary level, there really is not a lot of support for us.
Okay, thank you very much, Allison. We now have a question from Julian Pierre, the second VP of the Barbados Union Teachers.
Yes, please. This one is basically for the other countries, because regarding Barbados, I have an idea of the link between special education and physical education. In the primary level, at the primary level where I teach, one of the schools that I taught at had what we call here the special unit. And that made those students eligible for what we call Special Olympics here in Barbados, which is the opportunity for those differently abled students to have their day to shine in athletics and various forms of athletics. In terms of the other countries, because these students actually train to make the Special Olympics team for the island. I was actually one of the assistant coaches in 2016 for the Barbados Special Olympics team. And I know the level of training for Special Olympics is not only similar to that of normally abled athletes, but it also calls for a little special attention in terms of their eating, in terms of how they train, even simple things in terms of getting home from training facilities, in terms of teaching them the regulations that they would have to adopt and adapt to if traveling overseas representing the country. So I just wanted to get an idea from the other panelists, the other presenters, what is actually done in your country with regard to physical education for special education students.
Okay, so here in the BVI, special needs students in a couple years ago used to do Special Olympics, especially in the area of sailing. In the BVI, sailing is one of our biggest recreational sports that people come here and do so frequently. But over the years, it has dropped off the market. Governments come, governments go. This is honest conversation, and it no longer became a priority. So now we're now in 2021, and it's still not a priority. There have been a few sports fanatics who have reached out to me and spoken about, restarting special games for the students who have special needs. But again, they require funding, they require backing, they require support, and that has not been forthcoming. We do have a organization within government, Youth Affairs and Sports, but they, again, funding and all these different things that are needed to keep the programs afloat are not necessarily coming forth as a priority from our policymakers and our monetary officials. So it's not on the back burner, it's not thrown out the window, but we just need some more buying and maybe some regional support in terms of how we can get it jump started again. Because like I said, I do have a lot of students who are very talented in the sporting arena, who are classed as special needs, from running to baseball to to swimming, to any sport you name, they are very good, but they just don't have the avenue, the resources, or the personnel to take the time out. Like you said, it's more than just teaching them the craft. It's a whole set of skills that you have to teach them. So we just need that the persons who could be trained regionally on how to, and then maybe we can start to see it being re-implemented here in the BVI.
Thank you. In the chat, someone asked, what about special needs other than physical disabilities in terms of the physical education? I don't know if our Jamaican counterpart or Turks and Caicos could answer that as well.
Could you repeat the question, please?
Julian Peter had asked about physical education and special needs child. Someone in the chat has asked, what about physical education for the child who has other disabilities other than the physical disabilities? That the Special Olympics caters to that.
Right. The Special Olympics also caters to children with intellectual disabilities, not just physical disabilities. In Jamaica, Special Olympics is still a big thing. We have various national teams, so you may have them competing in bocce and basketball. There's also the unified teams where you have students without disabilities playing on a team with students with disabilities. And then there are other organized sports. For example, the Schools for the Deaf have their deaf sports where they play against each other. So they may have football competitions, other sports among each other. And then they, like some of the units also have their sports, so they have their sports day. So there are many sporting opportunities, many opportunities for physical education. And of course, adapted physical education is that whole branch of special education that speaks to how we make the games accessible, regardless of what they are, for various disabilities.
Thank you very much. I have a question here from Peter Brown. Go ahead, Peter.
Good afternoon, colleagues. And this question is really directed towards the persons from Jamaica and the BVI. I just tried to understand the system a little bit. I would like to know what type of support systems they have for the parents of special needs children, because you know it is very difficult when you have a child with special needs. Sometimes you find yourself by yourself. You don't know what direction to go, how to assess certain things that may be helpful for you, and if there's any financial support from their governments to allow the persons to probably even use the medical system. Also, that's one question. Also, I'd like to know, how do they prepare their students for the transition from the institution to having some type of marketable skill that they can have sustainable employment? Do they form groups or some things like a collective where they make things or have skills that they, as a group, where they can use various skills to market something, produce a product, or even service something as a group to make sure that these individuals, now who be a little older, can be able to sustain their day-to-day life.
All right, so that question has several parts, so I'll take a part. So in terms of parent support, we have a number of organized parent support groups. For example, the Jamaica Autism Support is a large parent support group for parents of students with autism. There are other autism support groups, and there are some groups for other disabilities. So that exists because that is critical, that parents are able to come together to talk about what they're going through and to receive support from each other. In terms of financial support from government, we have in the Ministry of Labor and Social Services, the Jamaica Council of Persons with Disabilities. And so that's an agency of the Ministry of Labor and Social Security. Now, if a person with a disability is registered, so we encourage our parents to register their children with the JCPD. And if they are registered, there are lots there are various forms of support that they can receive. For example, they may get an assistive aid grant, an empowerment grant to help them start a little business. There are scholarship opportunities, etc., if they're registered. From the Ministry of Education, there is some financial support. I spoke earlier about the shadow caregiver support program. So if the Ministry of Education assigns a shadow to a child, then the government is responsible for paying for that person. If we have to place a child in an independent school because we are not able to find an appropriate place for that child within the public education system, then there is also some financial support which is available for parent when in that situation. You spoke about transition. I had mentioned earlier about school to work transition, but I'll just add to that the Ministry of Labor also has some workshops where young adults having left the school system can be gainfully employed while still learning a skill. So they're learning a skill. So for example, there's one workshop that does baking. So they're learning that skill, but they're also earning a stipend. So there are those kinds of opportunities. I wouldn't say that they are as many as we really need to have, but there are some of those opportunities. And some of our schools also have adult programs where the young adults come back, like the Jamaica Association on Intellectual Disabilities has an adult program where they come back and they're engaged in skills training opportunities like this, where they can also earn a stipend.
Thank you very much.
He wants me to answer.
LaShawn, who's going?
LaShaunda can go ahead. I'll wrap up.
Go ahead, Lashaunda.
To make mention of what is offered in the Turks and Caicos Islands as it relates to transition into the working world, we are challenged in that area. Students from the SNAP Center, students that attend the SNAP Center, they are given the opportunity to enroll in, they have sewing, they have mechanics, they have gardening, and those kind of things. They also do work experience, but the SNAP Center is small and they are understaffed. So the number of students that benefit from the SNAP Center and all of its initiatives is limited. So students from the government secondary schools, when they finish school, it's like they slip through the cracks because there's nothing for them. We have not yet gotten to that part. We are getting there, and hopefully in the near future, there will be some kind of technical school or work experience, even in the shops, on the shop floor, something that would offer some kind of options to these students as they transition into the working world.
Okay, and just briefly for the BVI, we do have parent groups. They are not subsidized by the government. They have just taken it upon themselves to create that environment that parents can come and share and feel as if they are part of a community. Because as I said in my presentation, previously these students were isolated and the parents just kept them at home or not cognizant of the fact that these students require the support within their schools or environment. In terms of transition, we're not doing well in that regard. We have one school for more of the severe disabilities, and what they have done over the years is a work-related program. But the challenge is always the teachers would have to accompany the student to the job site, get them that little training, but when they leave the institution, there's nobody to carry it on as they migrate into society. Here in the BVI, we do have the Ministry of Health, which oversees disability services, which cover the adult population. So we try to keep that connection with them, but they themselves are lacking the human resources and the skill set to integrate this population into our workforce with an agency that trains them, teach them, basic banking, teach them money management, things like that, that would give them that independent push. So from education to the working world, we're not doing a very good job in that regard.
Okay, thank you, Afiya. I have a question from Latoya King. Go ahead. Latoya? We're not hearing you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, please.
Okay, great. All right, my question is more towards Barbados. Are there a list of schools that are available to the public that helps more with disabilities towards dyslexia and things like that for children now going into secondary school? Because I know for me as a parent, I had a great challenge with my son getting assistance, and eventually I had to take him out of the public school and place him into a private school because his old headmistress told me, she was very proud to tell me a story about a child that had a learning disability, and he only got assistance when he got into secondary school, and the teacher then sat down with him and assisted him to the best of their ability. And I always thought that that was not good enough, because I know there are a lot of children that are going in the primary school that are being pushed out and pushed out and pushed out of primary school into secondary school and have great challenges, especially with the reading and things like that. So I just want to know if there was a list of secondary schools, as Miss Murray stated that in Springer, there is a program for children like that. So I just want to know if there are other schools with those same programs.
Before you can answer, Mrs. Murray, I understand where if we're being honest, I understand where the principal may have been coming from. We refer students when they are in first B or class 1, and then the form comes back for the child when the child is in third form at the secondary level. So there's a lot of bureaucracy and red tape, I think, in special needs education. And I think one of our presenters would have spoken about the dearth in special needs therapists, psychologists, those trained professionals. And I think we have that problem here as well. Am I correct, Mrs. Murray?
I personally don't think that there's a dearth in the professionals. I think that we have quite a few. But what's happening is that we're getting lost in schools. Go to a school and you're assigned as a form teacher rather than having the opportunity to put things in place for students. So, we want these specialists, we have these specialists, but we're not giving them the opportunity to.
We're not using them.
Yeah, and not using them is not that we want to share and have enough of lessons or anything like that. You need an opportunity to properly plan a program. You have to do an analysis of the school, find out what the needs are, see how you can lend support to the school, and then you can put a program in place, not only for the students, but for your colleagues, also for parents, and that takes a lot of time, and you need a lot of support to get that done. So I personally don't believe that there is nobody around to do it, but it really is that we do not have a real policy. You have a policy for other things. You don't have a policy for this. So if I go to a school, you're not going to automatically think, well, let me give her support so that she can do some assessments. Let me ask her a question about, this child, what documents, Mrs. Murray, have you produced? That opportunity is not given. You're going to have to take register, or you're going to have to balance your register at the end of the year, or
supervise when somebody's absent.
Right. Those things are very, very, very clear. But back to the schools, Latoya, I'm not really in a position of authority to give you too much information about all schools. I only know about the schools I have worked at. For sure, there is a resource room program at Spring Memorial. I know that St. George Secondary has an entire resource room center. Mr. Brown is really going all out to make sure that these children are accommodated, and we are in process of trying to start a program at Granny Adams. But Latoya, you know, honest conversations in Barbados, everybody's not going to respond to the offerings at these schools the same way, but the resources are there. They're trained persons at St. George Secondary, persons who have degrees, master's level training in literacy, as well as at Spring Memorial, as well as at Granny Adams. So it really is up to the parents to have a level of trust in the program and to see the children, see the children through.
Thank you. If I may add, also in the primary school, we find that the at-risk students, the slower students, they're lost away in the system. You usually find the new teacher, the teacher who has not been to Erdison, the teacher who has no training is given the problem class, or yes, or the teacher that the principal doesn't like, or that's how it's seen, is given the special children to deal with. I see we're about to wrap up because we have like 10 more minutes. So we'll take this last question. I see Rihanna's hand is raised. So we'll take this last question and then we'll have I think we can have a closing comment from each of the panelists. Go ahead, Rihanna. Or your hand was still up.
Hello. Yeah, I'm gonna post my question to Allison. Since as a Barbadian, I would like to know what was the opportunities. Do you have some parents that experience literacy challenges? And if yes, are there programs for them? Because you have programs for the kids, but what about the parents that have the problems and don't know how to deal with these kids?
Thank you for your question. And yes, we do see many students whose parents experience challenges with literacy. When we're talking about dyslexia, especially what we call primary dyslexia, which has that genetic link. Some parents do present with that. I've met parents who have hearing impairments as well. And so having that type of support is important. Ideally, what would be a great idea, Rihanna, is if those in charge of timetabling will be able to perhaps have a session or slot dedicated for us to see parents. I did some research, sir, in 2013 that showed that parents are really happy to have their children at schools, but they're not happy about the disconnect they're facing with what's being taught. And parents are very honest with me. They don't know what to help their child with, or they don't know how to help their child. So it would be wonderful, if we have an opportunity, Friday mornings, maybe to have some parent workshops where we bring them in. And many, at the present placement, I've noticed that I teach the little brother of an older brother who also has literacy challenges, or the sister, like at Granny Adams. I hope we can call names. At Granny Adams, I'm teaching the brother of a girl that I taught at St. George Secondary. And I'm saying, what a wonderful opportunity to enrich and empower this family by providing an intervention that can help both children at the same time. So these are things that we can consider, but it have to be something that can be written in to the timetable and protected by admin. Seen as something that is worthy of getting some milk and being fed and growing to something that can help the community. And now we can keep spinning and spinning and spinning, and the children are going to continue to fall through the cracks.
Okay. Thank you very much, Allison. Got time for one more question, Marcia?
Yes, please. It is not so much a question, but a suggestion. We have been chatting for quite a bit about and sharing the way how special needs and inclusion of special needs children across the various territories that we have here today. And my question or statement really is, now that we've started sharing the different things that we're doing in Jamaica, we're doing here in Barbados, we are doing in British Virgin Islands, we're doing in Turks and Caicos Islands, I want to make a suggestion for us to come together and share our ideas, to try, not just to share them, but to try to implement something across the Caribbean, what should I call it? A special needs requirement. I don't know what I want to call it, but what I'm basically trying to say is we're doing lots of different things across the islands. We have deficiencies in some areas and some territories where other territories are excelling and have excellent programs. Why don't we put this all together and have a special needs program for the entire Caribbean and see if we can get it implemented in all the territories, realizing that there is a need for some sort of special education training, even if it is not in the area where all teachers specialize in it, like how you guys have, but understand that in our classrooms, we at some point or the other will experience a child or interact with a child that have special needs, and we need to have some sort of training for it. So just that it's a requirement in Jamaica, speaking on the correction, but I think Dr. Morgan mentioned that it was a requirement to get the certification in Jamaica to have special ed be done during the training. We need to have that across the board so that we as teachers can adequately instruct and help our charges, realizing that even where we have deficiencies, that we can then lean to our colleagues who may be more experienced because we have at least a grasp of what is currently going on with these children. So I think let's not just end by just having a chat, but let's follow up then by sharing what we're doing and trying to set a standard for the entire Caribbean so that in a couple of years, we can come back and say that in 2021, we had a lovely discussion, a lovely conversation across the region. And out of this conversation, we now have a standardized set way to go forward with special education and helping these children and helping teachers to better help these children across the Caribbean. That's my contribution.
Thank you very much, Marcia. At this time, I am going to hand over to Rudy, where we could get the closing remarks from our panelists. Rudy?
Cherise, Marcia, I take what you're saying to heart, and I believe that you're speaking about a Special Education Caribbean Association, if there isn't such a thing as yet. So if that isn't the case, now is the opportune time.
Legislation, not so much as the association that will then bring legislation across the board.
The legislation.
Yes.
We need to have the association so we can have the great minds together. At this point of time, I'm going to invite the four presenters to wrap up with 1 minute each. I see Mrs. Murray is smiling. I don't know if 1 minute is enough, but I'm going to ask you to give us one to 2 minutes of your time in terms of a summary of what you would have experienced today and what you're hoping to see from in the future. We start in the reverse. Allison Murray, Mrs. Allison Murray.
Yes, sir. Well, thank you again for the opportunity to have been here. It was wonderful hearing from my colleagues from around the Caribbean. And I too am hopeful that this will be the start of something big for us. Come on, guys. We already have Michael as a similarity. We already have it. I'm sure our lecturers are here and they're all very proud to see how we have taken our training and we're trying to use it across the Caribbean. I distinctly remember hearing them telling us that they're looking forward to hearing about what we're going to do. And I mean, it'll be wonderful if we can come together. Jamaica is in my mind miles ahead of us. And I dream of Jamaica regularly. And I love to hear the stuff that's happening there. And it's possible. I think too many of our boys especially are dying because they're not getting the opportunity to have their needs met in the context of our secondary schools. And I'd be willing and I'm ready to be a part of the Caribbean Association of Special Education Practitioners. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Allison Murray. Mrs. Lashaunda Skippings.
Good evening again, everyone. I've noticed that our neighboring countries experience almost the same challenges in special education as it relates to support for parents, training for general education teachers and special education transition to adult life, early intervention. Like Allison, I admire the way that Jamaica has most of these things all already in set. There's a program for everything and it's already set up. So Miss Anderson, please leave your contact information in the chat because we are in the early stages. We're still rolling out our policy in Turks and Caicos, and you would be a great resource person as we try to build on our special education policy here in Turks and Caicos Islands. So I am delighted to be a part of this conversation, and I am already tormenting Allison every now and again to ask her questions and to get her feedback while I'm here in the Turks and Caicos Islands. So this forum supplies me with many other resource personnel that I can go to. So I am indeed thankful.
Thank you very much, Lashaunda. Dr. Sharon Anderson-Morgan, the person who seems to be the leader in the Caribbean in terms of special education.
All right. Thank you very much, colleagues. First, I must say it was really great being a part of this conversation. I am quite excited about the possibilities and what I mean, together, we can definitely achieve more because we have various strengths in the various countries. And if we come together, collaborate, we can achieve so much more. We can influence policy changes and collaborate for training and all of those things. I'm gonna borrow a little phrase that one of my colleagues uses regularly, and he may be in this conversation as well. He's always saying that we need to mainstream special education. And by that, he means we need to have it in every conversation, at every decision-making table, not after decisions are made. That's where we need to go. We need to talk about it so much that, we'll know when we're inclusive, when we don't need to talk about it anymore. And that's where I want us to go. And I'm with Allison on, we have to break the silence. There's nothing to be ashamed of. We need to talk about it until we don't need to talk anymore because everyone else is talking. All the people we need to talk and understand are talking. So I'm ready for the collaboration, colleagues. I'm looking forward to it. We have on this platform representatives from the Jamaica Teachers Association. There's Dr. Charmaine Gooden-Monteith. There is Mrs. Patricia James, Anglin James, I'm probably getting that wrong, and she is the chair of the Special Education Committee. And so I know that the JTA is ready for this Caribbean Union of special educators. So we are ready to share and to get it right together for our children. Thank you so much. It was my pleasure.
Thank you very much, Dr. Anderson-Morgan. Mrs. Afiya Smith.
Yes, I would just like to say that I am indeed elated that I was a part of this conversation tonight. I do see it as a stepping stone in the right direction. Since I did my degree a couple of years ago, a lot of the content drove home that in special education, you always need those professional learning communities. You're not an island by yourself. And I think that we don't do well when it comes to understanding that concept that we need to unify when it comes to special ed. I also tell my colleagues that, you know, we are the voice for the voiceless. I heard my colleague on the call said that, you know, we have to speak out. But we are the speakers because sometimes the parents can't do it. The systems are not doing it. The officials above us are not doing it. So we have to be that advocate on the ground level all day, every day. It has to be a part of our language or a way of being. And I do agree that I would love to be a part of collaborating with my colleagues across the region in fostering the push for special education policies across the region, because, you know, here in the BVI, we're just starting to officially put the policies. We have our Education Act, but it's not enough. There's more to it. We need some in depth. And I do agree with my colleagues and say that Jamaica is where we all strive to be. And they have a plan and they have a structure that is working for them. And there are things that we can piggyback off from them and use within our different islands and territories. So again, I am grateful that I was here. And as I continue to do my part here in the BVI, I'm looking for the support of all my colleagues throughout the region. And I will do the same likewise. So thank you for having me here this evening.
Thank you. Just let me inform the participants that this presentation will be made available via the BUT's YouTube page. Let me also say it is my belief that this discussion merits a part 2. The BUT would therefore endeavor to make this a reality. And I am hoping that we can have the presenters from today in addition to other presenters. I now welcome Sister Donna Holder, principal of the Earlston Special School, to give the vote of thanks. They're not hearing you, Sister Holder. Please unmute. We're not hearing you, Donna. We're still not hearing you. Sister Holder seems to be having technical difficulties. While we are waiting for her to correct the issues, let me say that we are endeavoring, the BUT is endeavoring to have a 1-week session in the summer vacation relating to special education. So those persons from the region who would want to contribute via your expertise to sensitizing our teachers, our members to special education, please feel free to contact me or to contact Mrs. Allison Murray. Sister Holder, are you there with us? All right, Sister Holder appears to be having some technical issues. In her absence, I'm going to ask. You're there, Donna?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, please, we can. Thank you very much.
Well, needless to say, I'm not technology savvy. So a pleasant good evening to all, especially to the Myconians in our midst. As Allison stated, I myself am a Myconian and I'm proud to say that. And Allison knows how I feel about that. I wave my hand at that. It is indeed an honor and my pleasure to offer sincere gratitude on the behalf of the Barbados Union of Teachers. As practitioners in the field of special education, we often agitate for, but seldom are afforded opportunities such as this, which would allow us to share best practices, discuss emerging trends, and identify challenges which are pervasive in the field of special education. I now turn my attention to this evening's presenters. Afiya Smith, Education Officer with responsibility for special needs in the British Virgin Islands. I admire your passion in your quest to see that all students progress in the system of education in the BVI. Even though your task is a mammoth one, and there's a need for more professionals, especially psychologists, to cater to the increasing number of students with special needs, you are not daunted by this and endeavor to be an advocate for students with special needs in your island. I thank you for your presentation this evening. Dr. Sharon Anderson-Morgan, Jamaica, Assistant Chief Education Officer with responsibility for special ed in the Ministry of Education. You brought a wealth of knowledge to the table on special education in Jamaica. You have given us an insight into the best practices, challenges, and new initiatives being undertaken in your country. I know that Jamaica is rather large, and I commend the steps that you and your team, inclusive of regional coordinators, are taking to ensure that special education students are included as far as is possible in the regular education setting in Jamaica. Lashaunda Skippings, Turks and Caicos, special education therapist. Even though you started by stating that Turks and Caicos were now in the beginning stages of meeting the needs of students with special ed, you have made significant strides towards achieving this goal. With policy reform, we saw that public schools are inclusive in the development of students with special needs, the SBA teams, the iReady program, and SNAP centers. I applaud your thinking and foresight in recognizing the importance of the development of the Caribbean Association of Special Education, which, as you stated, will open the eyes of Caribbean leaders to the needs of the various communities of persons with special ed. Allison Murray, Barbados, special education therapist and dietitian. I am well aware of your passion when it comes to ensuring that students are given access to education and that the necessary support and provisions are put in place for these students. Your creativity and ingenuity have served to propel many students with exceptionalities in the education system in Barbados. You are an advocate, and I trust that you will continue to agitate for students with special needs. Honestly speaking, I can clearly see that we are all working towards the common goal of creating independent, productive citizens who will make a meaningful contribution to their individual Caribbean societies. And we are relentless in our quest to ensure that students with special needs are provided with quality education, which will enable them to reach their full potential. I eagerly await your collaborative efforts in the development and formation of the Caribbean Association of Special Education. I close by saying that I am looking forward to the continuation of honest conversations in the field of special education. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, once again, the Barbados Union of Teachers wishes to extend thanks to all the participants, especially the presenters, and we look forward, hopefully in the near future, to having part 2 of this conversation. Once again, we thank you.
Good evening.
Good evening to all.
Good evening all.
Who was the person who presented from Turks and Caicos?
Lashaunda Skippings.
Ashanda?
Lashaunda. Skippings.
Oh, Lashaunda, say the last name again.
Skippings.
Skippings, Lashaunda Skippings.
Yeah.
Oh.
All right, I think for the benefit of those who are still here, they can just scroll through the chat to see the contact information for the persons in your particular territory that you can get in direct contact with that person.